today is designing mentoring programs that deliver real results. And this is one of a series of webinars that we run every month or so with audiences all over the world. We run these in the mornings, UK time, and in the evenings, UK time for people, but the presenters may be anywhere in the world as part of our global network of people who specialize in mentoring and coach training. Today, Liz Merrick is in the UK, and I happen to be in Athens in Greece, and I expect, and from observations before, many of you are in all sorts of countries around the world as well. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Liz for the bulk of the presentation, but let me start the whole process by just giving you an overview of what we're going to be doing. First thing we're going to be looking at is the international standards, for mentoring and coaching programs. These are now owned by and run by the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and they basically are the standard, the benchmark against which organizations can look at the quality and the effectiveness of their mentoring programs. And what we're going to be talking about today is a whole process that's based upon those international standards. So we're going to look at the standards, we're going to look at what is good practice from program design, and we'll be drawing here on our experience with hundreds and hundreds of programs all over the world for all sorts of audiences, from school children to through students, through people in various levels of the workplace, all the way up to executives and directors, in aid agencies, in government, even in the military, wherever you want to go. There's lots of experience. We're going to be drawing on what makes good practice. And so if we just quickly, I'll just review with you the international standards. We'll come back to these as we go along. But essentially, the standards look at 6 critical things that define the capability and effectiveness of a mentoring program. One of it is what is clarity of purpose, what is it there for, who's it supposed to benefit and how. The second issue is how you make sure that people are trained and briefed to do the role. We know that if you don't train anybody, the best you can hope for is about 1 in 3 relationships really delivering value. If you train just the mentors, you can double that. Train the mentees and brief other key stakeholders around them, like line managers, and you get an even bigger bang for your buck. You get well over 90%. Sometimes we've had a number of programs where 100% of people have said they've got great value from the program. And of course, it's not just training right at the beginning, but it's training and support right the way through. Then the third element is how you select and match people. Who will make a great mentor? Who will make a poor one? How do you put together people so that you get the most effective learning relationship? The processes by which you measure and review what's going on, how you troubleshoot the relationship, how do you know that it's working? These are important parts of the whole package. And then the ethical standards, some people would call it pastoral care, but how do you look after people, support them through these relationships? And finally, the overall administration and support. How do you actually make it work from a financing point of view, from a project management point of view? So these are the 6 standards. They are highly effective and have been used by many organizations around the world to design their programs or to simply benchmark how they're doing against good practice. So now I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Liz Merrick. Now, Liz, I think will introduce herself, but Liz is one of the most experienced project managers in the mentoring program managers in the world. And has worked with me on many a program over the years. And so, Liz, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. As David says, I spend a lot of my time designing and delivering mentoring programs. And I've learned a lot over the years. The first program I put in place was back in 1992, where I worked at Merrill Lynch, where I think I put in the worst mentoring program the world's ever seen. But at that point, I'd only read one of David's books, and that's all I'd got to go on. I'd got a lot more to learn after that. What I have done is taken those core standards of the ISMCP, which are very much ingrained in me, and all the wealth of experience of working with David and working on lots of different mentoring programs. And I've developed these different elements of good program design. And I use these to lecture to my students at Sheffield Business School, where I teach on the scheme design and evaluation module, and routinely when I'm working with clients in designing their mentoring program. So David and I thought that for today, if I take you through these stages, link them back to ISMCP, and also talk about some of the challenges when you're actually designing your program. And then David and I are going to talk a little bit more about some of those challenges and pitfalls towards the end. So let's start off and think about the rationale for the program. And it's really critical to have that clear before you get started. A lot of clients that I work with have nice ideas that they want to set up some mentoring. They've got some people who'd make ideal mentors, but they haven't really thought through, why do we need a program? And I think it's very important to begin by thinking about the whole scope, purpose, and the benefits of what are you looking to get out of this program? And actually, what is going to support the program and what's going to actually get in the way? And culturally and organisationally, there are often a lot of factors that may stop a program. I think just answering some of these questions when you start to think about designing a program will help to inform some of those initial decisions. You know, have you really got visible commitment from people? Are people really honest about wanting a program? And is the culture supportive? And you may need to dig down a little more deeply to think about what could get in the way there and actually support these developmental dialogues. Have you actually got any resources? Mentoring can be quite labour intensive depending on whether you're using a platform, whether you're doing this all internally or whether consultants are delivering it. So there's a lot of questions to think about the resources. And have you got history on your side? I'll never forget one episode where I was pinned against the wall by some people during a client visit because they'd had mentioned previously about 5 years ago and it had gone disastrously wrong, but nobody had bothered to tell me about this before I went in to visit the client. So think about history and whether the organisations tried mentoring previously. And why are you doing it? You know, is this actually the right intervention, mentoring the solution? Or is it perhaps coaching that would be better? And I know David and I have debated this previously because I feel that if a coaching type culture isn't prevalent in an organisation, or at least people be familiar with having learning dialogues, it's often more difficult to implement mentoring. I think, David, you disagree with me on this slightly, but it's often a question I ask my clients.
I think we sometimes see it the other way around, that if you want to create a coaching culture, sometimes introducing mentoring gives people the chance to practice those learning dialogue skills offline, so with somebody who's not their direct report. So I don't think there's any one answer. We just have to be very, very aware of what's been happening in the organisation and what's possible in an organisation.
Thank you. I think really the point is, you know, don't do it in isolation here and think about what other organisational development interventions might also work and just check mentoring is the right solution. Then thinking about influencing the stakeholders. And this is really key because without the right people on board, your program's not going to get off the ground. So identifying who these individuals are is really important. Sometimes forming a steering group or committee to actually help implement and instill the mentoring is a good idea. Or it may be there's a specific network in the organisation you can utilise, perhaps a women's network or another group. You might find a mentoring champion is useful. Somebody who is on the senior leadership team, who can sell mentoring, talk about it, speak at events, can be very helpful. Or a number of champions would be fantastic. And who's actually going to run the program for you? Is this going to be within HR, outside of HR? How much external consultancy is needed? These are some of the questions that you really need to think about. Having a clear recruitment strategy is key. And again, this is very much stressed in the ISMCP principles as well. And when you think about recruitment, you need to think about what's in it for the people involved. You know, why would somebody want to be a mentee in this program? Is this going to be a pleasurable experience, or is it going to be quite onerous? And obviously that's a lot to do with the way it's positioned and the culture. What about the mentors? You know, very senior, busy people who are often picked to be the mentors, they need convincing that it's actually right for them, and they need to know what they're going to get out of it. So actually digging into some of the core motivations of the participants and thinking about how you target them, and we'll think about the comms and marketing in a moment, is really important, because there is a selling in of the program that needs to be done. Is the program going to be voluntary? And this is really key. Programs where participants feel that they're volunteering and they're doing this because they want to tend to be a lot more successful than when people are press ganged into the mentoring, and where you can get very superficial mentoring where there's not really much depth of learning. And many talent programs, sadly, are ones where mentees feel almost press ganged, or that they need to participate in the program for their career, and don't always go into it in a voluntary way. And I think if you're working on that sort of program, you need to think about how you can sell the benefits of the program in, and perhaps also make the compulsory nature of the program a little bit more flexible if you can. Do you need to do any vetting as well? If everyone who is volunteering is being prepared, how do you actually decide who's in the program or not? David and I worked on a very interesting program in the UK recently for the Care Quality, where there was complete oversubscription by the mentees. We had a big waiting list for that program, and it was difficult to choose who should go into the first cohort and who was to wait. So you do need to think about your principles for how you're going to, if you've got that sort of mass excitement of a program, who's going to go first? And then training. And are you going to train and prepare people before the matching or after the matching? And I think that's a really interesting question, because you can do it either way. And sometimes going through a briefing or a training session and talking about matching and talking about the sort of individual the mentor or mentee might want to work with really whets their appetite and gets them to think more clearly about the sort of learning partner they want. Whereas if you do the matching pre the training or briefing, that can also be very useful. I've had some tremendous success recently with actually working with mentors and mentees in pairs and helping them prepare for their relationship together in the same session. So there's pros and cons to both, but again, another decision to make. The whole communication and marketing aspect is really, really important. And you need to set aside some time to think about how are we going to do this, and who are we communicating to, and how widely do we want to go with that communication. The difficulty is that a lot of programs are accused of being almost sort of closed shops, very private, people don't know about them, and they can get a name for being very elitist, and people who haven't been invited to join the program can be quite disgruntled about the fact that this elitist program is going. If you can make things more open and advertise them and invite people to participate, obviously, with some guidelines around that, it can often sell the program into the organisation better. But you do need to think about preparation of materials and how you're going to sell this in, particularly to people, not just the mentors and mentees, but line managers and perhaps other senior leaders in the organisation. So, preparing the participants. And here on this slide, I've just got some sort of general ideas of things that you should include in your preparation. Coming back to ISMCP for a moment, it's felt that it is really important to have some real play skill, practice or exercise if possible in the training, because this really gives mentors and mentees an opportunity to try it out in a safe space before they go into that real environment. I think it's also really important that the mentors and mentees understand their roles, their responsibilities, and that they're quite clear on how a relationship moves through the different stages. So that building of rapport, being relaxed and responsive with the other person, setting some direction and objectives for how they're going to work together, and then progressing through the relationship till they reach that point of wanting to disengage and wind the relationship up. And some of these basics will just put a real safety net under the relationship and ensure that people know what they're really doing. Again, ISMCP really instills that an individual should understand the program itself, what it's all about, its objectives and its process. And I think that's really important, because if somebody is in a formal mentoring program and they don't know why it's been set up or what it's about, then really, are they getting out of that program what they should be doing? You know, there needs to be some clarity there. So, some simple ideas of things that you can include in your preparation. The matching is an interesting process. There are many ways to do your matching. And even if you're using a platform to do your matching rather than it being done by people, you do need to think clearly about what your potential matching criteria are. I think it's important that people match on as much difference as possible. I think having that stretch when you're working with somebody who is quite different to you, even though it's going to take longer to build your rapport, is really, really key. I'm going to just bring David in here for a moment, because I think, David, you have some quite strong views on matching as well and going for difference here.
Yeah, I mean, basically what we've learned over the years is that if you put people together who are too similar, you're not going to get enough learning out of it. And by similar, we mean same sort of background, same sort of discipline and so forth, same kind of personality. On the other hand, if you put people together who are very, very different, you may get more conflict, or they may find it more difficult to create rapport. And it's making a judgment about how much similarity and how much difference do we want. And that will depend on a whole variety of factors, like the learning maturity of both parties, and what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to, for example, have a diversity mentoring program that wants to really help people to understand how people from different cultures perceive the world, then you might want to go for more difference than similarity. But it's basically a choice that we make, and just having that equation in mind helps you to put people together who are going to be most good, going to be able to work together and really learn from each other. And sometimes, if there is a little bit of conflict, that little bit of grit in the oyster is what they get the most learning from. But that means you've got to then really support those relationships very strongly. So that has implications with the rest of the program design. So the matching process is integral, and it has all sorts of implications for the rest of the design of the mentoring process.
Thanks, David. I think it's also important to stress here that if participants feel they have a choice, they're going to be a lot more, the relationships are going to be a lot more successful than if they're just simply assigned. And I think there is a way of doing this, even though the matching can be on the basis of the program manager or coordinator doing the matching themselves and assigning mentors to mentees. I find one way that works really well is by going back to the mentee and asking them if they're comfortable to work with this particular mentor and giving the reasons why that particular match has been chosen. So they've got a chance to buy into the decision and are comfortable with it and can say no if they're not happy. And if that works, to then go back to the mentor and explain to them why we'd like to assign this mentee to them, the reasons for it, and the fact that the mentee is comfortable to work with them. And that, I find, works very well. It's giving people still some choice in the process, but it's not as complicated as saying to people, well, look, here are 3 mentors or 3 mentees to choose from. You know, what do you think to them? It is important that matching requests are invited, more so for specific experience. So using a matching form where people are given a chance to say what they're looking for in their partner is really, really helpful. When people actually choose their mentor or suggest who they want to work with, then you can get into dangerous waters. I can recall one program where we had 18 matches in this particular program, and it was one for a graduate program, but every single graduate chose the one female marketing director amongst the mentors as their mentor. So we had to do something about that. Nobody wanted the rest of the mentors. So I think any matching requests that are invited need to be handled carefully if they're for particular people.
I think, Liz, just to say one key thing there, the more that we educate the mentees about what they should be looking for in the relationship, the more likely you are to have effective matches. It's when people just assume that they should go for the person who's going to give the biggest boost to their career that you start seeing the problems.
Yes, and this leads us quite nicely actually onto another topic, David, because it's whether people are looking more for a sponsor than perhaps a developmental mentor. And I think often where you're working with a graduate program where individuals are younger, or it's a talent program for people where they're really keen to get on, they often want a sponsor, even though they're being invited to participate in a developmental mentoring program. So I think that also needs to be taken into consideration here.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that there's now an increasing literature about sponsorship and mentoring. And I've just reviewed a paper which looks at the dark side of sponsorship and how limiting it can be, particularly for women, to be given only a sponsor. And the data that we've got suggests that having a sponsor and a mentor is actually probably the better combination for people. But that isn't always available.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, just thinking of one program we both worked on, David, at National Grid, where individuals were given a sponsor and a mentor. That worked very well. Obviously, the resources and the time it takes to organise a program like that are much greater. But for people that you really want to develop, having an injection of a sponsor as well as the developmental mentoring is really successful. Good. Right. Well, here on the screen, you've probably already read this, but we've got some potential matching criteria that you can consider. I think often it's people's desire to acquire certain leadership traits or maybe certain experience that they tend to reach out for. I think what's really important is to make sure, if it's a developmental mentoring relationship, that the mentor is very clearly offline to the mentee and that the mentor isn't further up the line. So, for instance, the line manager of the line manager of the mentee or a situation like that, which can cause acute embarrassment. And where possible, and depending on the size of the organisation, if the mentor can be from a different division or different part of the organisation, it really helps the mentor's learning in terms of acquiring knowledge about a different part of their own organisation, as well as really supporting the mentee's learning. So even though matches might look as if, even if they're in the same organisation, you think, well, what on earth is the mentee going to learn about the organisation from working with this mentor? I think the stretch in learning other things and probably the sort of macro perspective of the organisation that the mentor has is immensely useful to the mentee. I've got just a little spectrum of approaches to matching here that I put together for a conference. And I think, whether you're going for a completely laissez-faire type approach, and that can be as simple as one program I was involved with that didn't really have any funds for doing matching. We had everybody in the room, and quite simply, people were putting their needs and offers up on a board and post-it notes, and people were doing the matching there on the spot. So, it was as basic as that. Or you could have people's profiles up on the intranet of the organisation, and again, let people loose to make their own decisions. Or it can be a facilitative type approach, where the scheme organiser supports the participant decision making, but this may be where individuals are given a choice of a certain number of people to choose from. Or then you've got the very interventionist type approach, where the organiser is doing the matching and the whole process is quite controlled. So think about when you're organising your matching, what sort of approach you want to take. And keep that idea in mind that the more choice people feel they have, often the happier they are with their match. I'd like to just think for a moment about supporting the programme here. Mentoring programmes, if they are not supported along the way, and that's from day one, where people feel they've actually got somebody to go and talk to if they've got an issue, a safe space to go and consult either, on the process of mentoring if they're unsure what to do, or if they've got an issue with their mentoring partner, through to actually getting some support or supervision on their relationship as they move forward. And this is really important for several reasons. It's important for the quality assurance of the mentoring program, to make sure that the standard of mentoring is consistent. And again, this very much ties in with ISMCP. There's the ethical aspect as well, just making sure no harm, in inverted commas, is being done by a mentor to a mentee, or even the other way around. I have had cases of mentees bullying their mentors. And then finally, the educative aspect. It's really important to keep upskilling the mentors and mentees in the process of mentoring so that they can get more out of the relationship. So for that reason, during the course of, perhaps if you set the program up for a year, having some check-ins a couple of times during that year to give support is really helpful to energizing and making that program thrive. And I'm just going to share with you a little. Oh, sorry, David.
No, I'm just going to add on to that, Liz, that it's now possible to have all of the mentors who wish to get accredited as mentors through the EMCC's European Individual Award Programme at the foundation level. So, and then to go beyond that and see a gradual increases in their competence level or their accreditation level from foundation through practitioner level and beyond. So we're finding that many organisations are saying it's quite useful to keep our mentors interested and by helping them to see that they're growing in their competence and recognising that growth.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm just going to share with you a little heuristic for mentoring that I put together with Paul Stokes, one of my colleagues from Sheffield Business School. Become more reflective as they develop, and they're able to look at their own experience, reflect on their practice and build on their skills. And then finally, they get to this point of being a reflexive mentor. And this is where they're really keen on their self-development and improvement, and they're actually able to reflect on their reflection and actually develop themselves much further. And as you can see from the bottom part of this particular diagram, the type of support and supervision that you give mentors as they move through these different stages differs. So with a novice mentor, it's just very much a quality assurance function, really. And as they develop, then it's around training them. But as they become more of a reflective mentor, then this is where they need a chance to have some supervision and support. Quite simply, you can do this with a group of other mentors, so they have some peer and leader-led type support, and they can share some of their experiences, discuss their process of mentoring and learn from it. And then as they become more of a reflexive mentor, it's how you develop that challenge function so that the mentors have more of a sort of critical challenge function to their mentoring, and they perhaps get some more or spot or situational mentoring on certain situations. And I think it's important for program managers and coordinators to be aware of how that support and supervision needs to develop as their mentors develop. And sometimes one size doesn't fit all in a program if you've got mentors of different levels and calibers. So it's something else to think about in designing your program. Finally, we get through to the review and evaluation aspect. So, why bother to evaluate? Well, it's really important that you have some consistent formative evaluation going on right from the beginning, just to make sure that the program is going to plan, and things may arise that you haven't thought of that you need to change in order to get the program to work effectively. It could just be quite simply to make sure you're on track and you're not moving away from your original objectives as well. So a lot of organizations really start from, the initial training onwards in, planning what they're going to evaluate and how they're going to do it. But what you need to do when you plan your evaluation is think of these different levels. You need to think about what the mentors and the mentees are getting out of the relationship. Then you need to look at the relationship level itself, the mentoring pair, and then finally the program. So think about the different levels as well as the different times when you can check in and actually review with people. I think it's always important to start with the end in mind. So when you're organising right at the beginning your purpose for the programme, think very carefully about what is it you're trying to achieve with the programme and how are you actually going to demonstrate that through your evaluation. And I think then it will give you some tangible ideas of why you're setting the programme up, and you can start planning your evaluation from that point onwards. So I'm going to think now a little bit about some of the pitfalls in programs, and I'd like David to join in here as well, and we'll just talk about some of the issues and challenges that actually cause problems in programs.
Okay, before we do that, can we just apologise to people that there's been some audio problems? Liz, I think they're all sorted now, but the sound has gone a few times.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay, but I think we're okay now.
Right, good.
Okay, yes, shoot. Carry on.
Right, well, just generally, I'll make a few points and then perhaps David, if you'd like to come in. Sure. But I find what tends to upset programs and get in the way is if they're not planned properly, if people are really unsure of their roles in the program, particularly mentors, if mentors haven't been chosen very well or being coerced into the mentoring, and if people aren't given enough preparation. I've had quite a few instances of imposter syndrome in mentors recently where they've just had an hour's briefing and been let loose and really are unsure of what to do, and that reflects on the whole relationship quality. If people don't have enough time to get involved in the mentoring, or the process is made too formal, that can also kill good mentoring. And I think, as I said a few moments ago, that actually failing to agree what your evaluation strategy is and measure outcomes right from the beginning can really cause a program to lose focus, and they really can lose their way. And finally, if people have got too much to do, if you're choosing really busy people to be mentors, I came across a case once where mentors had been given 5 mentees each. Well, they just really didn't have time to have those sessions. And again, if people are not supported and supervised during the process, that can also really affect the quality. So, David, what are your thoughts?
I think that you've covered that extremely well. There's a great example that we had of poor selection of mentors. This was a program for people leaving jail, young people leaving jail. And when in the first iteration of the program, there was a lot of attention paid to getting the right people who could really empathize and work with these youngsters. And then they rounded out. They didn't have money to really invest in the training and so forth. So they just chose people randomly, anybody who put themselves forward, and the program was a disaster. From 100% success rate of the relationships and keeping people out of crime thereafter, it went down to something like 27%, simply because they not really thought about getting people who wanted to be there and who were able to be really supportive to the mentees. So I think that for me, that's a dramatic example of the difference if you don't look at how you select your mentors. And we know in terms of measuring outcomes, where people in the organization, where participants actually know that the organization has some real objectives and wants the program to succeed, where they can associate with the organization's needs for the program, then the relationships tend to be much stronger as well.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Shall we have a look at maintaining and sustaining your program now, David? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think
you can do this one. Yeah.
I don't mind.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. Well, the first point is your lovely term of relationship droop, which is a Clutterbuck point, but I think it's a lovely way of describing when relationships start sort of withering or dropping by the wayside. So to me, making sure that you've got those check-ins, that supervision built in. Ideally, we're suggesting a midpoint here, 6 months in. If a program has got the resources, I do suggest that actually some supervision and support is given at the 4-month and the 8-month period, because I think that prevents any droop that can happen in the relationships. I think you do need.
Just to add to that, to say what we find is that the most common cause of relationship droop is that the relationship is really dealt with the easy things, the superficial issues that the mentee brings, and it's not got to any depth. And so once you've dealt with those superficial things, there's not much to talk about. And so part of the review process and the continuous development of the mentors and mentees is to help them actually dig deeper and make this relationship a much more values-driven, intensive exploration and learning.
Yeah, no, I agree with you totally. I think making sure that your stakeholder list is up to date, and that if you do lose champions or sponsors, that you actually replace them. And often mentors who've been involved, for instance, in a first cohort of a program, will often become real champions of the program because they've been involved in it. So keep that list of champions and sponsors up to date and keep those people working and supporting the program. I think this question around who will make a fuss if the program dies is a lovely one, because that really cuts to the core in terms of how the program's being received. And it's a good one for anybody involved in a program to ask themselves occasionally. I find the saddest thing with programs I have been involved in, and this is often because people move on and you lose your sponsor or you lose the main driver and energy behind the program, is that programs do just disappear. And, it questions actually how well the program has actually integrated into the culture of the organization and into the processes, if that does happen. But I think that's a really good question to ask. And also, what do you do when a program actually achieves its aims? What do you do? Do you move on and look at other ways of actually launching mentoring into the organization to support other purposes and target groups? I think it's amazing how programs can morph. You might start off with a talent program. You can then perhaps find that people want to focus on supporting their female talent. It can then move on to maternity mentoring, or supporting perhaps diversity or other inclusivity type issues. It's amazing how things, as they're successful, do grow and energize. And I think ensuring that the mentoring is very much part of the HR or L&D strategy and is linked with what those objectives and strategies are, ensures that it is very much linked with how things are moving forward and is an integral part, not a bolt-on, which I think can be dangerous. And anything else, David, or shall I just move on?
That's fine. We lost you again for a moment there, Liz, but I think let's wind it through and get to the questions.
Right. Okay. So just some last few helpful tips for success then. I think it is important to agree what sort of mentoring you're using. Is it sponsorship? Is it developmental or a hybrid? Get those resources in place so you know what you're working with. Get your buy-in and your credibility for the program from your stakeholders, and just don't be afraid to change things as you get some evaluation in. So there you are, David.
There we go. So everybody, now your chance to make questions. If you what we can, if you raise a hand, this is where I get fall over with the technology. But if you want to put a question, if you want to put a question into the question box or the chat box, please do. If you would like us to unmute you, we can do that. In fact, let's try and do that to everybody. I don't know whether we can do it to everybody. Okay, I'm not quite sure how we do that, so I'm not going to even try. But we can unmute individuals if you want to make a comment verbally. So does anybody want to make a comment in the chat room or the question room? Or have we shocked everybody into silence? I'm just trying to see if we can unmute everybody, but
shall I have a look as well, David, and
see if you can unmute everybody? Yeah.
I may lose the the slides for a minute.
Okay. So any comments or chats? Wow. Oh, here we go. So here's one from Kim Swaby, Liz. Can you hear me? So Kim, you're saying what type of different supervision methods have you used? Okay, let's let's work through the questions one by one. So can everybody hear me? Liz, can you hear me? Liz, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Yep.
I've been trying to unmute the participants, David, and I muted myself, so apologies.
Yeah, I tried the same, it didn't work. Okay, so here's the question from Kim. What type of different supervision methods have you used? Shall I just start to answer that one to begin with, and then you continue?
Yeah, no,
Basically, typically we'd use group supervision, simply from a cost point of view. Sometimes we've mixed coaches and mentors within the organisation for supervision. And sometimes we've brought in coaches from outside the organisation, so executive coaches from outside, and brought them into the supervision sessions. But it's pretty much always group supervision that we would have, and it tends to be voluntary whether people come along or not. Liz, do you want to add to that?
yeah. The other thing I have tried with some good success is where we've actually trained some of the more reflexive mentors to be supervisors. So there's been more peer supervision, but with a more experienced mentor.
Yeah, and very often we have a buddy system with experienced mentors, effectively buddying less experienced ones for their first relationships. Yeah. Then we've got one from Nurul in Malaysia. Is it okay to say mentoring is for self or career development and coaching is more for developing specific skills? And I guess that's a broad distinction. There's a lot of grey area in the middle, I would say. Liz?
I think there's a lot of grey there, to be honest with you. And I think it depends very much on your program and how you're defining the purpose of it, and also how you're defining the roles of the mentor. Because to me, there is an element of coaching that comes into mentoring as well. And some programs have a higher element of coaching at times. So if you take a reverse mentoring program, for instance, a lot of those that I've looked at recently, the mentors, you could almost call them coaches in some situations.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to be too hung up. I don't think we need to be too hung up about the difference between coaching and mentoring. They're part of the same spectrum, and effectively coaching. Although coaches very often don't, professional coaches don't like to admit it. Coaching comes from the tradition of European mentoring. It all goes back to the French cleric Fenelon, who was the first leadership writer in the Western world. So we shouldn't be too worried about the relationship, whether it's coaching or mentoring. It's what the person needs at the time. The big issue is if it gets too far into coaching, you can end up doing the mentor can end up doing the line manager's job and getting in the way of or creating conflict with the line manager. So we just have to be careful of that one.
Agreed.
I asked a couple of questions. Another couple of questions. What about when the group is of mixed experience? Do you want to do that one, Liz?
Yes. So I'm assuming this is the mentor group you're talking about here, rather than the mentee group. But I find working with mixed groups of mentors quite interesting. What I try and do is a sort of basic introduction to mentoring for everybody and make sure everybody's got those skills. But then with the supervision and support sessions, to offer a variety so that some of those mentors who need upskilling a little bit more get a chance to perhaps go to more sessions or more variety of sessions. For instance, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in the UK, we've been running a mixture of sessions to get the mentors up to speed. But what we've been trying to do is have some core sessions that the CIPD have been running themselves. And then I've been putting the icing on the cake for them with a variety of different sessions that they can sort of do a pick and mix with. So I think you need to think about engaging those mentors who are perhaps not quite as experienced and helping them get up to speed. And when you're also choosing, for instance, mentors, if you've already had one cohort or two cohorts of mentoring, so you've got some people who are quite experienced, and then you're introducing more novice mentors in, again, think about how you're varying the training or briefing at the beginning so that people aren't bored, those who know a lot, but you're giving some variety, but you're also getting those new people up to speed quickly.
Thank you. Andrea's just asking, are we going to email a copy of the presentation? Yes, if you just if you want a copy of the presentation, just email us, and we will, and Amanda, and we'll send one out to you. Do we run different supervision groups at different levels within the one program? Liz, that's probably you.
Yes, I do. It depends on the program, but I think it's important to actually check in with mentors and find out what they actually want. You know, some mentors are quite comfortable just doing a little bit of mentoring. They don't want to particularly develop themselves. I think it's always important with those individuals to try and engage them a little bit more and excite them about mentoring. Then you have others who want to go off and do a postgraduate certificate or something like that because they're so excited about mentoring. I think the whole engagement and communication aspect is really important, first of all, and then help plan each mentor's development plan as a mentor. So, yes is the answer if you've got the budget to do it.
Next one is, with the aging workforce, how do you see mentoring programs being implemented? For example, older mentee, younger mentor, and what challenges does this create? We're seeing a lot of reverse mentoring at the moment, with young people mentoring older people, particularly in the area of diversity, and this is particularly important to understand the thinking of millennials. So I think this is a major area for growth in mentoring programs within corporations. Liz, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I will. Just in that there's been increasing interest in flash mentoring recently, which there are pros and cons too. In fact, David, I think you've written an article on the pros and cons of that, yes, that some of our listeners might be interested in. However, I think when you've got a program with quite a lot of millennials in, you do need to think about how you're varying the mentoring. Maybe not so many sessions, maybe more virtually run, and I think helping the mentors to understand how their mentees work, and perhaps they're slightly, I've got to be careful what I say here, forgive me if I've got millennials listening in here, but perhaps reduced attention span. There's certain things you can do when you're designing a program to make it much more engaging and acceptable to a millennial mentee.
A question here from Damien asking, how effective is phone or Skype mentoring versus face-to-face? The answer to this is it depends upon how competent the mentor in particular is. We find that Skype mentoring, the critical issue with Skype mentoring is the technology. That we've had a couple of problems here where the sound has faded. Skype it has a lot more technical problems, which is one of the reasons we don't use Skype for this. So that's a technical issue. But I think what we've learned from experience and from a number of studies is that telephone mentoring tends to work when the person is really capable and experienced with using silence, for example. So to have a telephone mentoring without that background of competence in using the technology and being able to intuit what's going on for the other person, being able to give them thinking time and so forth, that's a critical issue, and we would tend not to want to do too much telephone only mentoring, at least at the beginning, until somebody's really experienced as a mentor. Liz, do you want to add to that?
I think everything you've said I absolutely agree with. To be honest with you, I think if people are using a good platform to work from and they're using their camera, I think they can have just as effective a relationship. People work virtually all the time these days. You know, it's superb if you can have face-to-face mentoring, but I think you've also got to be realistic.
Yes. Then this Marie has got, in my role as a mentor, I found that sustainability occurs when the mentee is passionate about the subject or sector as much as me when commencing from a graduate to a young professional to a senior manager. Yes, absolutely. The more the enthusiasm you get, the more energy the relationship it has, the more it's going to work. And Kim, you're asking the email address to request a copy of the slides. If you send it to Amanda at davidclutterbuckpartnership.com, that's Amanda at davidclutterbuckpartnership.com. We'll send you the slides. What do you think we should be thinking about? Do you think we should be thinking about the label reverse mentoring, as it may be contributing to the stigma associated with the reverse roles? I'm not sure there is a great stigma here, but I do think that it's not a particularly helpful description. I do agree. And what we've got is, I think we can find better ways of describing it. It's simply all mentoring relationships actually are two-way if they're working. And if it's not two-way, then there's probably something wrong with it. Liz, do you want to add to that?
Well, no, just what pearls of wisdom, David.
I think we've covered everything there. Yep, I don't see any others. Is there any last question anybody would like to ask?
Well, let me put your contact details up, David.
Yeah. Yes, you can also email me, of course, as well.
Yeah. And if there's anything anybody wants to ask, please email of me. Please ask David or Amanda. They'll be very happy to pass the questions on to me.
Okay. Right. Well, I think in that case, let's say thank you, everybody, for attending. And wherever you are, have a good morning, afternoon, or evening. And hope to see you on the next of our webinars in a month or so's time. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.